It started as just another morning at a busy downtown cafe, customers chatting, the scent of fresh coffee in the air. But then things took a turn. A group of white police officers walked in, laughing, exchanging inside jokes. They spotted a well-dressed black man sitting alone, sipping his coffee. One of them smirked. "Hey, let's have some fun," he whispered to his partner. Before anyone knew it, they were at his table. "Sir, we need you to come with us," one of them said, barely hiding his grin. Confused, the man raised an eyebrow. "Excuse me." But they were already pulling out the cuffs. Other customers glanced over, uncertain if it was real or some kind of prank. The officers chuckled, until the man calmly reached into his pocket, pulled out his ID, and said, "I'm your new district attorney." The cafe fell silent. The officers' faces drained of color. For a moment, no one moved. The laughter had vanished. The officers stared at the ID in the man's hand, their eyes darting between each other, searching for a way out of the mess they had just created. One of them cleared his throat, forcing a nervous chuckle. "We were just messing around, sir. No harm meant." The man, still calm, placed his coffee cup down carefully. "Messing around." His voice was steady, but there was weight behind his words. The cafe's customers, who had been watching in confusion, were now fully tuned in. A waitress stood frozen behind the counter, gripping a pot of coffee, her expression a mix of shock and unease. One officer quickly stepped back, while another fumbled with the cuffs, trying to play it off like a joke gone wrong. But the damage was done. The man, now undeniably their new boss, tilted his head slightly, watching them, waiting. The officers shifted uncomfortably, their confident smirks long gone. The cafe, once buzzing with casual conversation, was now eerily silent. A few customers exchanged glances, unsure whether to step in or stay out of it. The waitress slowly set down the coffee pot, her hands trembling slightly. One officer finally spoke. "Look, sir, we didn't mean anything by it. Just some friendly hazing, you know." His voice was forced, the words rushed. The man studied them, his expression unreadable. "Friendly hazing," he repeated, almost as if testing the phrase. He leaned back in his chair, folding his arms. "Tell me, is this how you greet all new officials, or just the ones who look like me?" The question hung in the air, heavy and unspoken for too long. One officer exhaled sharply, another rubbed the back of his neck. Outside, a siren wailed in the distance, but inside, the real reckoning had just begun. The officers' faces tightened, their forced smiles slipping completely. The cafe felt smaller now, the walls pressing in as every eye in the room stayed locked on them. The man didn't move, didn't raise his voice, but there was something in his steady gaze that made them more nervous than any courtroom ever could. One of the younger officers, who had been quiet until now, shifted on his feet. "Look, sir, we..." The man held up a hand, stopping him mid-sentence. He picked up his coffee again, taking a slow sip, never breaking eye contact. "You assumed I didn't belong here," he said finally, his voice even but firm. "You thought this was funny. So tell me, what would have happened if I weren't the district attorney?" No one answered. A bead of sweat rolled down one officer's temple. The weight of the moment pressed down on them. Outside, footsteps approached. Someone, maybe another officer, maybe a concerned citizen, was coming. But for the men standing there, cuff case still open, the real question was simple: what happened next? The cafe door swung open, the small bell above it jingling. Every head turned. A tall woman in a dark suit stepped inside, her sharp eyes scanning the room. She moved with purpose, her heels clicking against the tile floor. The officers stiffened as they recognized her, the police chief. She didn't look at them right away. Instead, she locked eyes with the man still seated, still calm. Then, with a nod of respect, she said, "Mr. District Attorney, I was wondering when we'd finally meet." The officers' faces paled further. This wasn't just a bad joke gone wrong. It had escalated to something much bigger. The chief folded her arms, glancing at the open handcuffs, then back at her officers. "Someone want to tell me what's going on here?" No one spoke. The silence stretched. The café, once just a morning stop for coffee, had become the scene of something far more serious. The police chief's gaze hardened as she looked at her officers, waiting for an answer. One of them finally cleared his throat. "Chief, it was just a misunderstanding," he said quickly. "We were just—" She held up a hand, silencing him. "A misunderstanding?" Her voice was cool, measured. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you just tried to arrest the district attorney, as a joke." The weight of her words settled over the room. The officers shifted uncomfortably, the reality of their actions sinking in. The man, still seated, finally set his coffee down and stood up. He straightened his suit, adjusting his cuffs, then looked each officer in the eye. "You assumed I was someone who didn't belong," he said, "and that assumption almost cost you everything." The officers swallowed hard. The chief sighed, pinching the bridge of her nose. "We'll discuss this back at the station," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. "Mr. District Attorney, I sincerely apologize for this." But just as the tension seemed to ease, the DA glanced at the officers one last time and smiled faintly. "You might want to check your radios," he said. Confused, one of the officers reached for his earpiece. A call had just come through, an urgent request from dispatch. Their badges had been flagged. An internal investigation had already begun. The officer's eyes widened in shock. The man picked up his coffee again, taking one final sip before heading for the door. Just before stepping out, he looked over his shoulder and said, "I guess I'll see you all very soon, in my office." And with that, he walked away, leaving them standing there, the full weight of their actions finally settling in. The officers stood frozen, their minds racing. This wasn't just an embarrassing mistake, it was a career-altering moment. The reality of what had just happened sank in as the café slowly returned to normal, the whispers of onlookers filling the space. The police chief let out a slow breath before shaking her head. "Get back to the station," she ordered, her voice firm, laced with disappointment. Without another word, the officers turned and walked out, their shoulders tense, their futures uncertain. Inside the café, the waitress finally moved, refilling a customer's cup with a knowing glance. "Didn't see that coming," she murmured to herself. Outside, the district attorney stepped into the morning light, adjusting his tie. This wasn't just about him, it was about something bigger. Change had a way of coming when people least expected it, and today it had arrived with nothing more than a cup of coffee and the truth.